Then we'll call the meeting to order.
Good to see you again.
Likewise. Tired.
The roll taken, please.
Mr. Peterson?
Here.
Mr. Egan?
Here?
Mr. Dunn?
Here.
Mr. Gentili?
Here.
Ms. Lasky? Ms. Goodman? Ms. Kaminsky?
We got a quorum.
We do have a quorum.
We do.
Alyssa just sent an email that she is unable to make it.
Oh,
That was nice of her,
say
anyway.
that again?
I'm just giving her a tip.
I don't get it.
Well
Don't
done.
get it.
So if you called on Mr.
First.
Gentili first, 2, 3, 4, then you go.
Okay.
2, 3,
Okay.
1, see.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Approval of the agenda. Did everyone receive and look over an agenda from a packet or online?
Yep,
So moved.
so seconded.
Moved and seconded. Comments or discussion? Being none, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Agenda is approved. Anybody see any public hiding anywhere?
Not anymore.
Approval of the minutes from the last meeting, which were also published, mailed, or
Mhm.
online.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any comments or discussion on the minutes? Those in favor of approval, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Minutes are approved. Treasurer's report.
Gotta approve accounts payable first.
Order.
That's first on the
Oh, yeah,
list,
yeah, yeah. I just read the main title, not the. Okay then, accounts payable. We had a chance to look at those?
Mhm.
Nothing riveting, huh?
Could we have a motion to approve the accounts payable?
So moved.
Support.
Moved and seconded, any discussion? Questions? And could we have a roll call vote, please, for accounts payable?
Mr. Egan?
Yes.
Mr. Dunn?
Yes.
Mr. Gentili?
Yes.
Ms. Lasky? Ms. Goodman? Ms. Kaminsky? Ms. Peterson?
Yes. Payable or approved, financial statement. The, Ms. Kaminsky. Cindy?
Howdy.
Hi.
So I would like to make one correction to the accounts payable. As you see on your revenue and expenditures, you see the contracted services audit, $6,300. I actually need to add that to the accounts payable. So they billed everything kind of together and it went under the county line item. And I did a journal entry and fixed that and put the $6,300 to the airport. So it really should be added onto the accounts payable. Lisa did approve it and it got paid, so it shows up in your revenue and expenditures, but I'll adjust that and I'll put that back for April to redo. So that really should probably go on the accounts payable.
So it would probably be in order to have a motion to amend the
Yeah.
approval of accounts payable.
Yep,
to this.
6,300,
You got that?
Sorry about that.
So moved.
I'll second that.
Moved and seconded to move the $6,300 that are contracted services into the accounts payable and correct paperwork?
Yep, and I'll attach that next month, so it'll be April and May.
Payable to the county?
No, it's still, it got paid, but I just did a journal entry and fixed the line item, and
Just a
so
line item.
it's just a line item issue,
'Cause
yeah.
I heard you say it got paid, so.
It got
it's
paid.
on the account.
So I fixed it, so that's why it shows up here, but like when you run the accounts payable for here, it just doesn't show up. We should just add it, not do it as like a line item. Just so includes that dollar amount. It does show up here.
Any other questions? Roll call then, please.
Mr. Don?
Yes.
Mr. Gentili?
Yes.
Ms. Lasky? Ms. Goodman? Ms. Kaminsky?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Egan?
Yes. Well, that was just to amend.
Amend, yep.
Okay, we have it, okay.
Yep, so we're gonna go over the revenue and expenditures. Does anybody have any questions going over that or the trial balance? For us still, that, bottom line is so high yet, but, or that will be corrected when we get that reimbursing grant from the Pfos.
I'll talk a little bit about that in my report, where we
Yeah.
stand on that.
Any action on that?
Yep, just to approve it.
Any other questions on the treasurer? Then, we move on to item 7, committee reports and discussion.
Now,
No?
Now, we need to
We gotta-
approve
Do a-
this.
Okay,
Yeah,
well, that's what I
do
just
roll
asked,
call.
nobody said anything.
Yeah.
All right, so then we need a motion to accept the financial report, item B.
Motion to accept.
I'll second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Gentili?
Yes.
Ms. Lasky? Ms. Goodman? Ms. Kaminsky?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Egan?
Yes.
Mr. Don?
Yes.
Okay. Now, the committee report.
Actually, one more thing
Okay.
financially related. In the middle of the table are hard copies of the financial audits.
I have one.
Thank you.
If everyone can grab a copy. I think we paid for them.
Thank you.
And I have a couple more
Okay.
we need. And
Are they going to come in June?
I hope so, I haven't got confirmation yet, but we're trying to get them here for our next meeting.
Well, they can actually zoom in, they don't need.
Yes, yes,
Yeah, we
yeah,
can do.
here meeting.
Mhm.
To the meeting.
Yeah.
Need to be done with that now, or?
Nope, but
Okay.
you want to have questions next month, during your presentation, reviewing it between now and then would be good.
All right. He's eyes. And here's Ms. Goodman.
Let me go grab a copy.
Now, I think we move on to committee's reports. Executive committee did not meet. Budget committee met last month and reported. Capital projects met and reported. Bylaws committee that we formed last month, you all got a copy of the bylaws, and we need to meet them after you take that. Are there any committees you think need to be?
That I'm aware of, no?
Okay. Then we're on to item 8, the director's report.
I'm sorry, did you
Yes.
say that they did meet, or they,
None of them met.
Okay.
The bylaws committee needs to meet. They all received, the two members received a copy of the bylaws to look at. And we'll
okay.
meet this month. So, director's report. Anything down?
Oh, I was gonna try to bring it up, I can never bring it up one day. So when our eyes have it,
Or do you do one?
I will disregard that.
Or do you do one?
Thank you. Karen, did you get one?
Window. I'm in the wrong tool, so. Yes. No airport incidents or accidents to report. Moving then on to kind of the numbers. So from a passenger standpoint, April was basically flat from last year. It surprises me a little bit, because in general, we're booking very healthy. But the real difference is a cancellation rate of 2% a year ago versus 13% this year. So when you cancel 11% more flights, you have 11% less seats to fill. So when they are generally fairly full loads going out, you just don't have the capacity to carry as many passengers. So that's really the issue there. And later on, I'll talk a little bit more as to the specifics of how April looked in general. But you'll see on the bottom part that 13% cancellation is actually better than the last 5 months. Not hugely better, but better. And that trend, I think, is continuing now as we go into May. Any questions on?
Improving trend.
Yes, improving, yes. This is really interesting this month, on the airfare side of things. On that. So here on the airfares, we're seeing something, quite honestly, that I've never seen before. If you look at the average fares of Traverse City, Grand Rapids, and Muskegon, they're pretty much identical, on average, within $6, which is 1% of a $600 average fare. Manistee right now, and these were gathered on Saturday, is about 20% less than all of those other airports. And obviously there's, exceptions, Traverse City's got 3 where it's the lowest, Grand Rapids 2, Muskegon 1, but the majority right now, this is best fares out of here. The thing is, if you look at the change from a month ago, the average out of here went up $90. The average out of Traverse City went up only $44. but Traverse City saw a huge increase 2 months ago. Grand Rapids went up $200 on average in the last month, which is, 30%. And then Muskegon, 137. So what's driving that? Fuel pricing is obviously a huge factor in that. Capacity, many of the carriers have been cutting capacity because of their constraints with crew availability and employee staffing levels. A lot of things are driving the industry after 2 years of COVID-related chaos, to really driving fares up. So this is going to be an expensive time going forward, to be traveling, at least until fuel prices normalize, but I don't think there's any outlook as to when that might happen. Cindy, since you're in the industry, are you seeing the same things, or is this, because sometimes when you just do it once a month on a specific day, you can get, sales and stuff can
Right.
drive things not necessarily accurately, but.
No, I've been seeing a steady trend upward, yeah. And it's been, almost daily. You look at a price, you quote somebody, and they call a day or two later, it's like $100, $200, $300 more. I've really seen a big difference in cost. Yeah.
So does anyone have any questions on this? Move on. So Victorian Car Rental, as I reported last month, the plan was they would start, doing the car rental concession here as of May 1st. That happened. So far, things are going smoothly. As I had indicated, their rates are significantly higher, but they're renting brand-new vehicles as opposed to vehicles that are on average 10 years old. So that's driving a lot of that. I think Greg is still getting his hands around the car rental business, even though he's been doing some rentals for a number of years. This is much more a full-time operation now. So I wouldn't say it's been perfectly smooth, but I haven't had any issues other than maybe a little bit of confusion for people who have come to expect it working one way because of the way it's been for, as I learned in talking to Paul Bosham and Jim Mowry, 60 years they basically had the car rental concession out here. So that's a really long time for the same operation to be providing a service.
Are the cars actually out here, or did they bring them as their?
Generally, they're bringing them as, on the day that
Yeah,
a
okay.
rental's needed because they're doing all cleaning, so
Yeah,
back at their location. Any other questions on that? On the LEO coverage, law enforcement officer coverage, I gave an update on that last month. I've got a draft letter of agreement with the sheriff's department that's being reviewed. Hope to have that all tidied up by next meeting. And then, just a minor update is in May is when we're required to have our annual Firefighter Recurrent training. That's what ARP is, Airport Rescue and Firefighting. That happened a week and a half ago. What we've been doing is every other year or every third year, I think we're kind of moving to a 3-year schedule, 2 years and then 1 year. 2 years sending people to another airport to get trained as part of their training. It reduces our cost significantly. And that's what we did this year as well as last year. It's hard to remember because it was one of the COVID years we had them come here, but then there was really no opportunity to do much, but we had it all planned that way. So they went to Saginaw, to MBS to join in their training. It's generally where we go We have also sent people to Lansing, years. Plan right now would be every third year, we'll actually bring out, on site, because then we can also train, the Manistee Township and any other department's, personnel. But that raises the cost from about $2,000 to around $7,000, so trying to push those expenses farther and farther out, but still receive some of those benefits. So I thought this was notable, because we've been talking about investing in RT hangars. As of now, we have one that's available for renting. We've got, I think, 3 people that will be coming in this summer, sometime over the next 60 days to be renting, including 1 board member. Thank you, Mike. So with that, we have 1 that's available for rent. But to note, we do have a total of 3 that are empty, but 2 are basically not rentable because their doors are off tracks, broken. And the last time that we brought someone out to fix a door in that state, it was about a $3,000 bill. And, you know, we're looking at projects around $10,000 per hangar to replace the doors, so investing that amount of money while we are thinking of replacing doesn't make sense.
No.
So, but I just wanted to give you an update that, you know, there is demand surfacing for Manistee hangars. Not something we've necessarily seen the last few years. This is just a carry forward on the township zoning. I'm thinking maybe, well, if we got a presentation from the auditor next month, maybe our July meeting will be a time that I want to spend some time talking about that. So, keep it there on the radar. Our airport layout plan update. I've been spending a little bit of time talking with Prina Newhoff. I still don't have a full draft of the document. But one of the things that we spent a couple hours back and forth in discussion last week on, and I just really wanted the authority to be aware of it, is in the current version of that document done 20-some years ago now, there were plans, or the possibility of plans, to extend our north-south runway. Currently, it's about 2,700 feet long, which is fairly short. It eliminates its use for a lot of mid-size, small aircraft. That's kind of a weird term, but, you know, anything that's a small aircraft can use that, you know. But if you start talking about something that's like maybe a small twin-engine aircraft, that's getting pretty short unless you've got really strong winds to be using that short of a runway. So 3,500 is kind of the next size that kind of accommodates that type of traffic. The north-south runway is what's known as our crosswind runway. Its purpose is to allow the airport to be used when you've got strong crosswinds, so winds out of the south or out of the north. Things like that are things we see generally fall through spring. Summer winds generally tend to be pretty much dominantly out of the west. But in the winter, we get a lot of northwest, northerly winds. Transition in both fall and spring, we can get a lot of strong southerly winds. So those are the times where that can be used. The airline is fine with, Cape Air is fine with using it and will occasionally use it. Again, they're operating a small twin engine, and if there are strong enough winds, it can accommodate that. But again, getting to that next level of traffic. I've always questioned the viability of that being in our long-term plan, because you stand out here and you look to the north, you're pretty much looking at the casino, and B, you're looking at a fairly steep hill that's basically going up to the north. So as Prina Newhoff were working on this, and basically doing all the survey work, what they discovered is, while it is technically feasible to do that extension, one of the other things is we would have to reroute the entrance to River Road and move it most of the way up the hill, which gets it into wetland areas and potential issues there. None of that would be cheap, but possible. But what they found is that the airspace clearance required would basically be 16 feet above ground level, basically over the casino and especially the campground parking lot. So for that to actually happen, A, we'd have to remove every tree that's up there, and B, we'd actually have to lower parking lot lighting, keep it under 16 feet tall. Yeah. And I asked to double check things like the casino sign and actually the buildings themselves, because yes, they're set further back, but they're also fairly tall. I don't have that back yet, but what we really concluded is that's just not feasible, because you're potentially having planes landing, just right over the tops of RVs and people in parking lots, and knowing the difficulty we had last time, we needed just to cut a few trees on tribal property. This level of invasiveness. Yeah.
What if they were to change the grade of the existing runway? And gave it a, 4% grade change with your cross intersection of the runways being 0, and you elevated and dropped one way or the other from that point.
Right. That actually, in some ways, it helps, but it also hurts. Because with the grade, you now need more length because you're going to carry more speed because you're essentially going downhill as you're landing. So
well, it depends unless you hit it from the other way where you're going uphill.
From one direction, it'll be fine, but the landing over the casino, that direction would actually possibly require even longer runway to accomplish the same thing. And then longer runway basically just moves the problem back to where it was. So I can't say that they've looked at that. I'll actually ask, because we're actually exploring other things of, since we've now acquired the Adamczyk property, would it be possible to just relocate the runway on the other end of the airfield? That ridge basically runs the whole length of River Road, so I don't know, but sometimes there are dips, and there's certainly less buildings and build-up the further down River Road you get, so there would be less interference from neighbors and others than what we're trying to be do in the current location.
Yeah, he's right. The south runway, that is my least favorite runway to land on, because it seems like you come in either too high, or there's like, it's pretty close down there.
And think about moving it 700 feet closer.
When you said that, I was thinking, there's no way, and that's just in a Skyhawk. And that's a pretty easy plane to land. But, yeah.
So, this is something that I went back and forth with them on last week. Really gave Prina Newhoff the indication that unless there's something that's a better option than what's being planned, this probably doesn't make sense. If we were to remove that extension, that would then fully open the parcel on the other side of the road for development projects. Because it's right now, that potential extension is basically preempting any other development in that area because the FAA is not gonna approve developing in an area that you're saying, but someday we might wanna use this for a runway extension. So there are benefits potentially to the airport and, maybe, the community in having more commercially developable space on 31 or off of River Road, abutting 31 in this area. So I just wanted to mention this to the board because it's, I think, relevant to a lot of the things that we think about. And Andrew, if you have any thoughts on what I've said, since you are here partially representing the casino and therefore the owners of the casino, unless you think otherwise of what I said.
Look.
Okay.
Yeah, I could see where they'd say no. I mean, especially coming over their park, their RV
Right.
park and stuff like that.
Right,
I'd be
yeah.
one of the first people screaming. That'd be bothersome. But we need it, don't we?
Actually get more pushback from them on the tree cutting.
Oh, yeah, that's true too.
Mhm.
Going south is the river, right?
Correct. I
Yeah.
mean, going the
I
other
didn't know
direction.
how close it was, but I know it's
Yes.
quite a drop off at the end there.
Yeah.
And there's enough land down there, that property that the airport bought to actually put a north-south runway down there? Or would it maybe have to angle a little bit, or?
They're looking at this,
Okay.
If you look at this on Onyx,
Yeah.
I was gonna say, would they have a map of it?
if you get towards the end,
Mhm.
the east end, got a lot more marsh out here. The problem that you get into when you get on this side of the road, then you'd be looking at acquiring more property.
Yep.
And that would
But
be
again, those things are doable versus, but yes, more property would likely be, and if this project was talking about rerouting River Road, that would probably also require an interesting snake in River Road to kind of go around. But they're looking at it. So to your question, do we require it? No, but the whole purpose of a crosswind runway is to allow aviation to use the airport under a wider range of weather conditions and wind directions. Our primary winds are westerly, but again, seasonally, we do get those other directions that can utilize that. And as I've mentioned in this meeting before, Cape Air, the smaller the airplane, the more that matters. So one of Cape Air's issues is that they've been unable to get into O'Hare on some windy days when the winds are out of the north or the south. Because the larger airplanes are okay using the east-west runways at O'Hare, but they're not able to on the smaller aircraft.
So it's probably important for any type of growth and with having a second growth also, would be to do it right and have a runway that we,
That would, again, that is kind of for our size airport and the type of aircraft we generally are servicing, that is kind of that next level, to give us more functionality than we currently have. Could we, with 2,700 currently, if we could probably get 200 more feet, but we're not really gaining extra classes of aircraft that could use it until you get to that 3,500, that's kind of the magic number.
so you have an analysis of this going on right now, where they give you like a,
Yes, that's what the ALP is all about, is really that plan or potential plan for the next theoretically 20 years of potential future.
Property across the street,
Yeah, it's between there, it's 11 or 12. But whatever constitutes the water path of the McGinnis Drain
yeah.
flows right through there, under 31, then behind, and then back through to the river. So as you get closer to the hill, it's more wetlandish, than it is along River Road.
This little triangle is the 13-acre piece. And then that is adjacent to the other piece, but that shows up at 509 acres for the entire airport. So there's substantial real estate on that side of River Road.
Yep.
This could be an advantage for the airport.
Because we wouldn't be allowed to sell it. It does serve a purpose as a buffer, as, you know, controlling the height of things. But we could certainly long-term lease it, for projects. Not very dissimilar to what Traverse City Airport did with Costco. I mean, that's a 70-year lease on airport-owned property that they couldn't sell to Costco, but they actually probably have a better deal long-term, with the long-term. So,
At least back to the county too.
yeah, I mean, it's not necessarily an easy process because the FAA is involved and they
Right.
have to approve it all, but it's certainly doable in the right circumstances. And if it is aviation-related, then it's even easier. If it's non-aviation related, then they ask more questions. Okay, moving on then. I mentioned this earlier, but our Pfos testing grant project, the final work was completed. I asked last week if they could speed up in getting us the invoices so that we've got everything then paid, and then we can get that final grant reimbursement for the outstanding, I think it's $80,000 plus then whatever the final set of invoices would be, so that our underlying fund balance can kind of get replenished from this grant. So I'm hoping to get those invoices soon and then kick off that process. And something else I will add to this is Eagle put out, or Eagle, which is the state's environmental agency,
The old DEQ.
yes. Don't know what the
The
acronym
old
stands for.
DNR.
No,
No.
DNR is separate.
They had an additional grant, process this year, which was in addition to what was done here in 2020, with the intention that those dollars would go to other airports, those that didn't get funding in this first round, which were really focused on the commercial air service. From my understanding, there wasn't a lot of interest in other airports pursuing funding, partly because the more you know, the more it opens you up to potential future things. So commercial airports were encouraged to also apply for additional funds out of this round of grants. So we did apply, and what we applied for was basically to now monitor all of these monitoring wells that we have and the required testing of those monitoring wells for a period of 3 years, I think. So if we're awarded that grant, we'll have additional work that can be done that we won't have to pay for. I just thought I'd mention that I did that paperwork last month. Then moving on to Cape Air. So today is the beginning of our summer schedule. So as of today and through Currently, it's scheduled through mid-October is our summer schedule, which is 4 round trips a day with 5 round trips on Sundays. That has kicked off today, fine. We actually there was many concerns by staffing that there wasn't gonna be crew to actually fly the schedule, given, what Cape Air has, been doing. And, oh, that actually reminds me, something that I should have put on here and I forgot. It's actually important. So, especially since we're gonna talk about Cape Air's bid later on. So, 2 weeks ago, Cape Air, announced that they were pulling out of 2 airports in the Midwest, Burlington, Iowa, and Quincy, Illinois. Basically because they don't have the crew to adequately fly them. So I've talked the last couple months about what SkyWest has done. There's another EAS airline boutique that is having issues staffing and has announced pullbacks in certain areas. So now Cape Air has done that. So what concerned me when I first heard that, because initially I got it as a voicemail and I had to listen to it times, because those are the other 2 airports that fly into O'Hare. That will leave us as the only Cape Air served city that flies into O'Hare, which causes me to question why. And I called back and had the conversation with Andrew Bonney on that question. So why would you be pulling down service 2/3 of your airports, keeping Manistee, which he assured me is their intention? Because it doesn't make sense from my perspective of their business. What he explained to me is that we fit their model better than these other airports. Couple reasons for that. Our flights are over water. That's what they do everywhere. I mean, whether it's in the Caribbean or in New England, a lot of their flying is over water. We're a natural fit. And in the past, Andrew and I have had conversations about their desire to expand that because there's a lot of water around Michigan. So I think long-term, they see other possibilities.
Makes no sense to me.
No.
You know, there are islands around Michigan that are similar to some of the northeastern, islands as far as travel to and from. So there are things that I think make and northern Michigan long-term fit their model, even if it doesn't necessarily make as much sense today. The other thing, which I think is more of a dominant reason, is in essential air service, there are subsidy caps that apply under certain circumstances. And we generally avoid the more significant subsidy caps because of our distance from Chicago and Detroit. So the subsidy caps are, first off, if you're within 45 nautical miles, I think it's 45, it's somewhere in that ballpark, and it's more than 45, it might be 60. You're within 60 miles of a medium or large hub. That's a FAA definition. The airports in our region that meet that criteria are Milwaukee, Chicago, both Midway and O'Hare, and Detroit Metro. Those are the medium and small hub airports in our region. If you're within 60 miles of one of those, you are not eligible for essential air service at all. If you are within 210 miles, you are limited to a $200 per passenger subsidy cap. We are more than that from both of those those airports, or all three, with Midway included in that, and it's highway miles, so it's not direct miles. So Milwaukee, you're really farther away, even though distance-wise you're shorter. So we are outside of that cap. Then there is a no more than $1,000 per passenger, max. The problem is that these limits put in place probably close to 20 years ago are not indexed for inflation. That $200, and Cape Air is looking at that with the current inflation rates, and they're saying there's no way going forward they're going to be able to provide service to Burlington and Quincy and stay under that cap. So thus, those airports became the airports that were on their chopping block. So because Cape Air is a large, established essential air service carrier, they will probably be continuing to serve those airports for an extended period of time, because under essential air service, you're not allowed to leave an airport until replacement service is established. Given the 29 cities with SkyWest trying to find, given that pretty much all of the major players are cutting back as opposed to expanding because of the same issues with crew availability, Cape Air is thinking that it may be a year or more that they're going to still be providing service there, but it's not part of their long-term plan for it. So it doesn't necessarily impact us in the short term, but we may, with Cape Air, be operating into O'Hare without as much backup or support with those other airline or other cities feeding into the same thing. So, sorry, I forgot to put that in my report, but I definitely thought it was important to
They
mention.
were talking about maybe doing some maintenance here. Does losing those two places affect that?
No, actually, it increases the likelihood of that because we are more remote now, and they definitely are looking at doing that. So I am expecting one of the first things that will happen, assuming we recommend accepting Cape Air's bid and DOT formalizes that will be one of the first things they do once they have a contract with DOT for 2 more years, to basically solidify moving maintenance up here. Any questions on any of that? Okay, then moving on. So, mention a little bit about Cape Air's performance. April was an improvement, but still a struggle. It's very interesting that in April, the vast majority of all their cancellations happened before the middle of April. So they were crew-related as they were transitioning people through training. I had been warned about that back in March, that it was going to be rough. They thought it would be less rough than it was, but since the middle of April, so now we're at the middle of May, we've really had a very clean run. There was one day in the latter half of April that had some canceled flights because of more mechanical issues. And then there was yesterday where we did have crew-related cancellations because one of their crew assigned here has COVID, so he's on a 10-day quarantine, and another exceeded or was about to exceed their allowable flying hours, so they just didn't have backfill to handle yesterday's flights. Today, though, with the new expanded summer schedule, all 4 round trips, 8 flights total, are crewed, and while we don't yet have our formal summer crews in place because their union just did route bidding last week. Do have this week fully covered, and I believe the next couple, although I have not verified that with, Cape Air management yet. But things look okay right now. And quite frankly, flights are full. I mean, we've been running close to 75% of our flights fully sold out, through yesterday. And then today going forward, even though we're doubling the schedule, we're still probably about 50% of our flights sold out. So we are looking good on that front. So, and that's really what this, slide goes into. So our passenger numbers are looking very strong, especially now in May. That's actually my last point here. I'll start with that. So we are currently trending 30% better than any previous May except 2011 Frontier. So we're about 40% right now up from a year ago. And a year ago, we were just shy of our previous best May. I mean, it's really shocking the amount of passengers that are booked. Somewhat nerve-wracking until I'm really confident that we have our summer cruise in place and, you know, barring illnesses, you know, we're set on that. But, you know, May is looking good. June is trending. July and August are trending higher, but July and August, we already know that we will hit our maximum capacity because we already did that last year. We'll just hit it earlier. And then a couple other statistics. So last week, sold a total of 463 seats, Cape Air did, which is the best month since I've been keeping track, which is now 11 years. And in April, we sold more seats than any previous month, including, which is traditionally our best months were June and July in the last 11 years. So part of that may be driven to those airfares that we saw earlier, but I think it's just in general acceptance of the connectivity that Cape Air offers. And if we can minimize the negatives that Cape Air has had with cancellations and having to bump people for that, having to bump people because they're overweight. There's been a little bit of negative chatter with bags, with the aircraft, total aircraft being overweight, not specific people being overweight. Thank you for, I didn't realize how that sounded until you laughed.
They're a growing society.
We've had a number of bags not making it, again, for weight issues. So first thing they bump are extra bags versus passengers. All of those things lead to some frustrations in the traveling public. Because we are still in May and the possibility of frost still exists, they're having to carry on the Technim 100 pounds of extra weight because of the icing fluid. That goes away once, I don't know what the cutoff date is, but once we get far enough along that frost is not a consideration, you know, that weight comes off, so that gives us more for passengers and luggage. So overall, I'm maybe not. I'm happy about some things, and I'm still cautious about other things. But Cape Air is doing well.
Need to have that. What is it? They ship golf clubs. That's what they do.
Yes.
That needs to be an advertiser for us. Seriously.
Yeah, and golf clubs have been one of those things that have gotten bumped, and there's nothing that makes someone
Going
fly
golfing,
up
but
here.
I can't.
Go golfing, more upset than getting off the plane and not having their club.
Right, yeah, no kidding.
And I don't know if they strictly follow a last person that checks in, but, you know, they have a procedure and to try to not target anybody in specifically, but. Then moving on to essential air service. So, as I had indicated to the board, in email, on 4/22, DOT notified us that we received one bid, Service Cape Air. It was attached to your packet this month. Community comments, which generally come from this board, although anyone in the community can submit comments to DOT, are due later this week. So I would, you know, like to gather the board's input on what their thoughts are on Cape Air's bid, and I will, you know, write a letter reflecting the board's desires in that regard. And then the other bullet point I have here is that the SkyWest cities, all of them, their bids were due last week. The results of those got posted on Friday. I didn't think about it, so I didn't spend my weekend going through them all. I'm really curious, and I'm going to do that sometime soon, just to see what the landscape looks like for those that didn't get bids or got suboptimal bids, or however that is viewed. I got one more thing, but I'll save that for next. So I guess my thought is, if you've had a chance to review the Cape Air proposal, it is, I guess I'll give a summary. It is essentially their current level of service with a couple of minor tweaks. Actually, I guess just one tweak, and it's really the date range of their summer schedule versus winter schedule. So currently, in the current contract, they start their summer schedule mid-May, day, the 16th, and go through mid-October. So that's about 5 months. And that was a slight modification of what they originally proposed when they bid last time, because their original proposal was 6 and 6, so starting May 1st through the end of October. But when I asked them, could they give us more flights in the summer, and they came up with that 5 flights on Sunday, they basically took that by reducing a few days in that service. In this schedule, they're actually proposing to start summer schedule about a week later than they do now, but going all the way through the end of November, so through Thanksgiving. So we gain like 5 weeks on the end and lose a week at the beginning. I'm happy with that, because we will definitely, Thanksgiving weekend, we could, you know, have 5 times capacity and probably use it. Not necessarily reasonable for someone to try to schedule, but you know, from mid-October through into early November, that's still a shoulder season for our tourism industry. It certainly is well-traveled. You know, there may be a week, 10 days, 2 weeks for Thanksgiving that get a little bit lighter, but having that capacity through Thanksgiving, I'm happy with. That does bump up their annual number of flights a little bit higher than what is currently done, but it's essentially the same thing, a little bit longer summer season versus winter. Other than that, the only other difference, although the difference is something we've talked about here, is they formally put into their proposal that they intend to have Chicago Executive Airport as an alternate. So on those windy days in O'Hare where they can't, you know, get into east-west routing, they can use that as an alternate, and then they will provide transportation over. So instead of canceling they're at least able to get people to their destination,
How far away is that?
like 8 miles,
Yeah, it's pretty close.
so it's not far at all. So, thoughts?
I have a lot of options here.
Sounds
Yeah.
good to me.
We
Given
don't
the-
have a lot of options.
Given the current lack of options, do you foresee that continuing, and if so, you recommend locking in longer, or just going with the current pace of every 2-3 years? Because I know they offered a longer-term option with a somewhat minuscule discount.
Right. My personal recommendation would be 2 years. Even if our only available, option going forward would still be Cape Air, it would give Cape Air the opportunity of maybe trying to bump capacity a little bit. Whereas right now, if we were to take 4 years, that basically, you know, that schedule would be locked in for 4 years. We couldn't 2 years from now review in light of, you know, how their pilot situation is, could they maybe add, you know, extend that further, the summer schedule, or maybe even increase July and August a bit. It just gives another point to essentially negotiate that would be taken off the table. That would be the reason I would recommend we stay with 2 years.
I agree.
I hate long-term contracts because service suffers, because they seem like most vendors tend to get lackadaisical, so I agree with you. The shorter term, I just didn't know if you saw the current situation changing and there being possibly other bidders down the road.
As I kind of talked about earlier, and what SkyWest has done, Cape Air has done, is even with a 4-year contract, that doesn't prevent anybody from pulling out early. It more limits our freedom than it does the airline. Not that airlines generally commonly end or try to pull out of their contracts early, but if they find a need, they will. So I don't see a reason to tie our hands. It's certainly less work for me not to have to do this. It's really, you know, every 18 months from now is when the whole thing really starts again. But I just don't think that it serves our best interest.
So you're gonna need a motion from the board to accept the EAS bid from Cape Air.
Or to recommend to DOT that they award to Air.
So
I'm
moved.
gonna ask you if we were at that point yet.
Second.
Moved and seconded to accept Cape Air's bid.
Recommendation to MDOT.
Yeah, to recommend to DOT.
No, DOT.
Yeah.
Moved and seconded to recommend DOT contract, is that right?
Award to
Award.
EAS contract to DOT.
Any discussion?
For
Moved and
a
seconded.
2-year
For 2 years. period. Any other discussion? We need a roll call vote, I assume, on something like this.
Ms. Goodman?
Yes.
Ms. Kaminsky? Yes. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Egan?
Yes.
Mr. Dunt?
Yes.
Mr. Gentili?
Yes.
Ms. Lasky?
Okay, then the last thing I have here, and this is really just kind of a cleanup from something the board approved last month. So last month, the board approved the new fee schedule, and the motion had that effective as of October 1st, which is when most of those fees need to go into effect. However, there is one that I'm requesting we change. As I mentioned last month, we completed the meter redoing project on our new T hangars. So we now have gone from there being 4 consumers meters that each hangar tenant fully pays, to having 1 consumer's meter and then 4 sub-meters that we basically can monitor usage. The idea was ultimately to save $100 a month in meter charges. Every meter in a commercial, it's about $30 a month, so we're going from $120 to $90 roughly, or from $120 to $30, saving $90 a month. But without having an opportunity to start changing our billing structure until October 1st, I'm basically requesting the board to amend the fee schedule to have the new T-hanger monthly rate be effective June 1st for the new T-hangers, and to set the kilowatt-hour charge for electric usage at 20 cents a kilowatt-hour. Our cost is currently about 15 cents, so, we'll make a few cents there. Most people are using 4 or 5 kilowatt-hours a month, so it's like $1 a month for that, unless they've got electric heaters or things like that plugged in which case it can be $20 a month of electric usage. So what this essentially is doing is, if you look at the current rate of $175 plus a $30 meter charge, people were effectively paying about $205, and we're essentially raising this to $225, $226 with the actual billing. So about a 10% increase, which aligns with all of the other rate increases that we were approved last month.
So did you type this up right after I agreed to take possession of a hangar in June? The timing of this seems a little...
Wheels are coming off this train.
Man. I get it.
You were part of last month's meeting, so you knew what was coming.
Oh, yeah. Should have known.
Anything in the current agreement that requires more than 2 weeks' notice of the change?
No, they're all month to month.
This is still really fair. I mean, out in the hangar world, this is really a good deal, and especially with the quality of those new hangars out there. This is. I mean, I'm making light of it, but this really is a good deal.
So you're saying you wanna pay a lot more, eh?
What's the
I'll meet you out
what's the
back.
absolute no deal price?
I don't have to call my wife for that.
Well, I'd like to hear a motion then to change the effective date from October 1st to June 1st.
For that one item or for all?
Just that one.
Just one item.
Second.
Moved and seconded.
Thank you for not making me have to do
So
that.
when are you going to read the meters?
My plan would be essentially the first, around the first of the month, because that's when we did it last month. So basically in time for you to send out bills for the month.
So then for May, should we bill it ahead? So then for April, will they be charged, or were the meters still down then for April? I haven't sent out the May bills until this meeting to find out what to charge them.
Okay, so I guess in my email to you, my recommendation was that we stop charging them because we don't really have an approved plan in place as to how to charge them for that in-between period.
So then,
Charge for it.
Yeah, if it's only a few bucks,
right,
is it worth the effort?
It's gonna cost you more in billing than
Yeah.
it is in...
right.
It's it. Push it.
So then it'd be the June 1st would be your first
Yes.
meeting then for May, right? Okay.
Okay, motion's on the floor, it's been moved and seconded. Any other discussion? Roll call, please.
Ms. Kaminsky?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Egan?
Yes.
Mr. Dunn?
Yes.
Mr. Gentili?
Yes.
Ms. Lasky? Ms. Goodman?
Rental paying rate.
Has to be aviation related.
So
The
loaded
priority
question.
is aviation related. If we have availability and someone wanted to having more revenue is better than nothing, but if someone later came and said we would have to kick them out, for an aviation-related. We don't currently have anyone, with one exception, and that is Ted Aaron's, because that was part of the agreement in his donating his hangar to the airport, is that we provide him space in a hangar, continue storing stuff, as long as we have availability.
That makes it the one I saw open last week.
Oh.
What's that?
Really?
Yeah.
Anything else, Barry?
Nope, that is the end of my report.
Item 9, old business. Zoning update.
So again, my plan would be to do that in July.
And the letter of agreement with, law enforcement, we already touched on that.
We already talked about that. That's part of my report.
Then we're, the new business, which we already
did.
took care of. This is the number 11. Any comments by any authority members?
The only thing I would tell you is discussion at our ARPA, at our special meeting last week?
Yes,
Maybe 2 weeks ago, it doesn't matter. I would say this sounds very positive. Pooling the requests from the airport into the county, there's about $2.5 million, and probably a little more than that, total of rainy day stuff and wants and desires that we have, that I would say the probability is very high.
that the county realize that county issues are.
Should take highest order for that, and then we can disseminate from there.
I appreciate your efforts on this board and on the board.
Quick question, Barry, on the MD&A. Maybe it's different for governmental agencies. There's a little snippet here where you're kind of talking about future-looking statements and possibilities of things that may impact the business, but there's really no comments here about the pilot shortage or EAS carriers pulling out, or none of that's required in this, like in a commercial entity's MD&A?
I mean, that's a good question. I know the auditors have in the past put things more broadly. Generally, the comment I think they've used in the past is if we were to no longer have essential air service, how that could impact. But more specific than that, that's never come up in the audit.
We wouldn't have had a bid, they might have put that in, but at the time that we were audited, we had service. So they look at it from year to year, and then, there was a good probability that the same carrier that we had would put in a bid.
I'm just thinking from a
Right.
commercial,
Right.
business standpoint, if you have what he just informed us, that our current bidder is just announced they're pulling out of 2 other.
But we didn't know that at the time that we
Okay.
were, that the audit was going on. We can't know later on what's gonna happen, but at the time of the audit, I mean, high probability that they were going to, because they showed the interest.
But there's a risk clause,
Right.
isn't there? There has to be a risk clause, no matter what. I
Right.
mean, we were in the midst of services, but
Right,
like
right.
you're saying,
We had service.
we must have.
I think next year's audit, that's a good note.
Any comments? Being no further business on the agenda, we are adjourned.